Okay, Chapter 4, The Tall Stranger, Louis L'Amour. We might not get through all this chapter, but let's see. All the next day, Sharon thought about that wagon trail out of the mountains. Several times she started to speak to her father, but he was preoccupied, lost in plans for his new home, and thinking of nothing but it. Later in the day, she saw Dud Kitchen riding over. He reined in and slid from the saddle. "Howdy, Sharon. Sure glad to see you. We've been talking home. Mary and I about getting up a sort of party. Seems like Satterfield plays a fiddle, and we thought we might have a dance. Sort of. Liven things up a mite." "That's a good idea, Dud," Sharon agreed. She looked at him suddenly. "Dud, did Mary tell you anything about that wagon trail we saw?" His blue eyes sharpened, and he ran his fingers back through his corn-colored hair. "Yeah," he said, "she did. Dud, it looks to me as if those wagons were out here before we were, just waiting. It begins to look as if somebody planned to have us stop here." "You mean Mort? But what would he do that for? What could he gain? And even if he did, you've got to admit it's a good place." "Yes, it is, but just the same, I don't like it." Her father was walking toward them with George Pagones and Cap Mulholland. "What's this you young folks figuring to do?" Cap said, grinning. "Here we're having us a party." Her answer was drowned by a sudden rattle of horses' hooves, and she saw three men swing down the canyon trail. When they saw the group before the house, they reined in. One of the men was Red, the man who had called on them the first day. Another was, her breath caught, Rock Bannon. "Howdy," Red said. He looked down at the men, then recognized Cap. "Seen anything of a young fellow, about 20 or so, riding a bay pony?" "Why, no," Cap said. "Can't say as I have. What's the trouble?" "He's Wes Freeman, who rides for us. He was hunting strays over this way yesterday, and he never came back. We figured maybe he was hurt somehow." "No, we haven't seen him," Crockett said. Dud Kitchen was grinning at Rock. "Shucks, man, we figured you had left the country. What you doing?" Bannon grinned. "I'm riding for Hardy Bishop," he said. "Went over there right after I left you folks." "What made you think your man might have come over here?" Pagones asked. "Was he riding this way?" "As a matter of fact," Red said, "he was riding back northeast of here. Pretty rough country except for one canyon that's got some good grass in it." The third man was short, thick-set, and tough. "Hurry up, Red," he said. "We beat around the bush, tell him." We beat around the bush. Oh, I'm sorry. Why beat around the bush? Tell him." "All right," Red said. "I'll do just that, Bat." He looked down at the little group before the house. "Fact of the matter is, Wes's horse come in about sundown yesterday. Come in with blood on the saddle. We back-trailed the horse, and we found Wes. We found him in the open valley we spoke of. He was dead. He had been shot through the back and knocked off his horse. Then whoever shot him had followed him up and killed him with a hunting knife." "Zapata," Sharon's eyes widened, and she looked around to see Dud staring at her, gray-faced. She had seen Zapata shoot. That was in the previous chapter. In stunned silence, the men stared up at the three riders. Rock broke the silence. "You can see what this means," he said sternly. "Wes was a mighty nice boy. I hadn't known him as long as these men, but he seemed to be a right fine kid. Now he's been murdered, dry-gulched. That's going to mean trouble." "Well, why come to us?" Cap protested. "You don't believe we don't believe," Bat broke in harshly. "We know. We trailed 3 riders down out of those hills, 3 from here. Wes was my riding partner. He was a darn good boy. I'm going to see the man who done that." "Turn around." The voice was cold and deadly. As one person they turned, Pete Zapata, his gun low slung on his hips, was staring at the 3 riders. Flanking him were 2 men with shotguns. both of them from the Teamsters crowd. The other two were Lamport and Purcell of the wagon train. Behind them and a little to one side was Morton Harper. He was wearing two guns. "Get out of here," Harper snapped harshly. "Don't come around here again aiming to make trouble. That's all you came for, and you know it. You've been looking for an excuse to start something so you could get us out of here. Take our homes away from us. Now turn your horses and get out." His eyes riveted Rock Bannon. "As for you, Bannon," he said sharply, "you're a traitor. You rode with us, and now you've gone over to them. I think you're the cause of all this trouble. If a man of yours is dead, I think it would be a good idea if these friends of yours back-trailed you. Now get moving, all of you." "This is a bad mistake, Harper," Rock said evenly. "I'm speaking of it before all these people." He nodded at the group in front of the house. Bishop was inclined to let him stay, despite the fact that he was afraid they'd bring more after them. "He listened to me and didn't run you off. Now you're asking for it." "He listened to you." Harper's voice was alive with contempt. "You, a trail runner." Red looked quickly at Rock and started to speak. Bannon silenced him with a gesture. "We'll ride, Harper, but we want the man or men who killed Wes, and we want him delivered to us by sundown tomorrow. If not, we'll come and get him." Turning abruptly, they started away. Wheeling, Zapata grabbed a shotgun from one of the Teamsters. "I'll fix him, the bluffer." "Hold it." Pagonis had a six-shooter and was staring across at Zapata. "We don't shoot men in the back." For an instant they glared at each other. Then Harper interposed. "Put it down, Pete. Let him go." He looked around. "There'll be a meeting at the saloon tonight. All of you be there." When they had all gone, Tom Crockett shook his head sadly. "More trouble, and all because of that Bannon. I almost wished we'd let him die on the trail." "It wasn't Bannon, Father," Sharon said. "Those men were right, I think. Mary and I saw Zapata yesterday. Two of the horses they trailed back there were ours. The other one was his. We weren't 50 yards away from him when he fired that shot. We didn't see what he shot at, but it must have been that man." Crockett's face was gray. "Are you sure, Sharon? Are you positive?" "Yes, I am." "Then we must give him up," he said slowly. "If he killed, he should suffer for it, especially if he killed that way." He got up and reached for his hat. "I must go and tell Morton. He'll want to know." She put a hand on his arm. "Father, don't say anything to him until you've told the others. Pagonis, I mean, and Cap, I'm afraid. Pagonis, I mean, and Cap, I'm afraid." "Afraid of what? Morton Harper is a fine man. When he knows what happened, he'll want something done himself." Putting on his hat, he started across the road for the cluster of buildings. Only for an instant did Sharon hesitate. Then she swung around and ran to her horse, standing saddled and bridled as she had planned to ride over to Mary's. Dead Kitchen would be there in Pagonis. They were sitting at the table when she burst into the room. "Please come with me," she said. When she had explained, "I'm afraid," without a word they got up and buckled on their guns. It was only a few hundred yards to the saloon, and they arrived just a few minutes after Tom Crockett walked up to Harper. "Morton, my daughter and Mary Pagonis saw Zapata fire that shot yesterday," Crockett was saying. "I think we should surrender him to Bishop. We don't want to have a part in any killings." Harper's face hardened, and he started to speak. Zapata, overhearing his name, stepped to the door, his hand on a gun. Then Harper's face softened a little, and he shrugged. "I'm afraid they were mistaken," he said carelessly. "You're being needlessly excited. Probably Pete was up that way, for he rides around a good deal, the same as the girls do. To shoot a man in the back, he wouldn't do it." "Oh, but he did," Dead Kitchen interrupted. "What the girls say is true." "You call me a liar?" Harper turned on him, his face suddenly flushed with anger. "No," Kitchen replied stiffly, his face paling. "I ain't calling a man a liar, especially a man who come over the trail with me. But I know what I seen with my own eyes. Mary told me about that, and I'll admit I figured there was something wrong with what she said, so I went up and back-trailed him. I didn't have any idea about a killing then, but I trailed the girls, and then I trailed Pete. Pete Zapata stalked that cowhand 2 miles before he got the shot he wanted. I went over every inch of his trail. He was fixing to kill him. Then I trolled him down to the body. I seen where he wiped his knife on the grass, and I seen some of them brown sort of cigarettes he smokes. Pete Zapata killed that man, sure as I'm alive." Zapata had walked cat-footed to the edge of the wide plank porch in front of the saloon. He stood there now, staring at Dud. "Trailed me, huh?" His hand swept down in a streaking movement before Dud could as much as move. His gun bellowed, and Dud Kitchen turned halfway around and dropped into the dust. "Why, Mort!" Crockett's face was gray. "What does this mean? You better all go back to your homes," Harper said sternly. "If Pete Zapata shot that man, and I don't admit for a minute that he did, he had a reason for it. As for his shooting here, Kitchen was wearing a gun, and he accused Zapata of murder." Pagona's face was hard as stone. Two of the teamsters stood on the porch with shotguns. To have lifted a hand would have been to die. "That settles it," Pagona said. "You can have your town. I'm leaving." "I reckon that goes for me, too," Crockett said sadly. "I'm afraid you can't go," Harper said smoothly. There was a glint of triumph in his eyes. "My friend John Keyes has lent you all money and supplies. Unless you can repay him what you owe, you'll have to stay until you've made a crop. California is a long ways off, and he couldn't be sure of collecting there. Besides," he added, "Indians have rustled some of your stock. I have been meaning to tell you, most of your oxen are gone." He shrugged. "But why worry? Stay here. This land is good, and these little difficulties will iron themselves out. There are always troubles when a new community begins. In a few years, all this will be over, and there will be children born here, a church built, in many homes." Dud Kitchen was not dead. In the Pagona's house, Mary sat beside his bed. Satterfield had removed the bullet, and now he sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee. "He's got a chance," Satterfield said. "A good chance. I'm no doctor. Just picked up a mite when I was in the Mexican War. But I think he'll come through." Pagona's, his heavy head thrust forward on his thick neck, stared into the fire, somber, brooding. He turned and looked at Satterfield and Crockett. "Well," he said, "it looks bad. Looks like we're in a fight whether we want it or not. Hardy Bishop hasn't bothered us none, even after all of Mort Harper's preaching about him. Now that breed has killed one of his men." "That Red," Satterfield muttered, half to himself, "he don't look like no man to have trouble with, nor Bat either." "Where does Rock stand?" Pagones demanded. "That's what I'm wondering." "Said he was riding for Bishop," Satterfield replied. "That's plain enough." "If we'd listened to him, this wouldn't have happened," Mary said. There was no reply to that. The three men stood quiet, listening to Dud Kitchen's heavy breathing. The rap at the door startled them, and they looked up to see Rock Bannon standing there. Sharon drew in her breath, and she watched him, wide-eyed, as he stepped into the room and closed the door after him. Hat in hand, his eyes strayed from them to the wounded man lying in the bed. How tall he was, and his shoulders had seemed to fill the door when he entered. He wore buckskin trousers, tucked into hand-tooled star boots, and checkered shirt with a buckskin jacket, Mexican fashion, over it. On his hips were two dragoon Colts in tied-down holsters. "You heard bad?" he asked softly. "Yes, but Jim Satterfield says he's got a chance," Mary said. Rock Bannon turned to look at him. "Well," he said, "you saw me ride in here today. You know I'm riding for Bishop. From what's happened, I reckon you know that war's been declared. You've got to make up your mind whose side you're on. I talked to Hardy Bishop into letting you stay on against his better judgment. He was all for running you off pronto. Now, not because he had anything against you, but because he could see settlers getting a toehold in his domain. Now, one of our boys has been killed. Even Bishop might have trouble holding the boys back after that. I've talked to them, and they want the guilty man. They don't care about anybody else. What happens now is up to you." "Not necessarily," Pagones objected. "We'll call a vote on it." "You know how that'll go," Bannon objected. 10 of you came in here with Mort Harper. Then he brought in Keyes and Zapata. Now he's got other men. Supposing your 3 vote to turn over the guilty man, how many others will vote that way? Cap may think right, but Cap will vote pretty much as Harper says. So will Purcell and Lamport. Any way you look at it, the vote is going to be to fight rather than turn Zapata over. No way to be sure of that, Satterfield objected. Harper may decide to turn him over. Bannon turned, his temper flaring. Haven't you learned anything on this trip? Harper's using you. He brought you down here for his own reasons. He's out to steal Bishop's Valley from Hardy. That's what he wants. You're just a bunch of dupes. You got any proof of that? Crockett demanded. Only my eyes, Rock admitted. But that's enough. He owns every one of you. Lock, stock, and barrel. I heard about that matter of you being in debt to Keyes. Don't you suppose he planned all that? The door opened and Cap Mulholland came in, and with him was Collins. Cap's face flushed when he saw Rock. You'd better light out. If Pete Zapata sees you, he'll kill you. That might not be so easy, Bannon said sharply. All men don't die easy, nor do they knuckle under the first smooth talker who sells them a bill of goods. Mulholland glared at him. He promised us places and we got him. Who's this Bishop to run us off? If it comes to war, then we'll fight. And die for Morton Harper? Do you think he'll let you keep what you have if he gets in control of this valley? He'll run you out of here without a penny. You're his excuse, that's all. If the law ever comes into this, you can always say the Bishop used violence to stop free American citizens from settling on the land. That's just what he's doing, Cap said. If he wants war, he can have it. Then I'd better go, Rock said. I came here hoping to make some peace talk. It looks like Zapata declared war for you. Now you've got to fight Mort Harper's war for him. You were one of us, Pagonis said. You helped us on the trail. Why can't you help us now? Rock Bannon looked up and his eyes hesitated on Sharon's face, then swept on. Because you're on the wrong side, he said simply. Sharon looked up and her eyes flashed. But you were one of us, she protested. You should be with us now. Don't you understand loyalty? I was never one of you after Mort Harper came, he said. Sharon flushed under his gaze. Whatever I might have been, Harper took away from me. I ain't a smooth-talking man. Guess I never rightly learned to say all I feel. But sometimes them that say little feel a sight more. He put one hand on the latch. As for loyalty, my first loyalty is to Hardy Bishop, he said. But how could that be? Sharon protested. He's my father, Rock said quietly. Then he stepped quickly and silently out the door. His father? Pagonis stared after him. Well, I'll be danged. That don't cut any ice with me, Mulholland said, nor his talk. I got the place I want, and I aim to keep it. Harper says there ain't any way they can drive us off. He says we've got guns enough to hold our own, and this canyon ain't so easy to attack. I'm glad it's coming to a showdown. We might as well get it over. All I want is to get to work, Collins said stubbornly. I got a sight of it ahead, so if that Bishop aims to drive me off, I wish he'd come and get it over with. All that talk about Harper using us, Satterfield said uneasily, that didn't make sense. Of course not, Cap said hotly. Bannon was against everything we tried to do right from the start. He just never had no use for Mort Harper, that was all. Maybe there is something to what he says, Sharon interposed. Cap glanced around irritably. Begging your pardon, Sharon? This is man's talk. I'm not so sure, she flashed. We women came across the plains with you. If we fight, my father may die. That makes it important to me. And if you think I'm going to stand by and let my home be turned into a shambles, you're wrong. Her father started to speak, but she stepped forward. Bannon said Harper was using you. Well, maybe he is and maybe he isn't. But there are a few things I'd like you to think about, because I've been thinking about them. Did Mort Harper look for this town site? No. He rode right to it. And to me that means he had planned it. What affair was it of his which trail we took? Yet he persuaded us, and he came down here. And we came down here. Who got us to stay? Harper. I'll admit I wanted to stay, and most of us did. But I'm wondering if he didn't count on that. And what about those wagons of supplies that turned up at just the right time? Why, they just followed him on from the fort, Mulholland protested. Did they? Sharon asked. Go up and look at the trail. Mary and I looked at it, and no wagons have come out over it since we did. Anyway, Anyway, would he let those wagons come across that Indian country without more protection than he had? Those wagons were already here, waiting for us. They were back up in a canyon northeast of the trail. I don't believe that, Colin said. Go look for yourselves then, Sharon said. You sound as if you're against us, Cap said. Whose side are you on anyway? I'm on the side of the wagon train people, and you know it, she said. But a lot of this doesn't look too good to me. The first day we were here, I rode down in that valley with Mort, and he said something that had me wondering, something about taking it for himself. Don't make sense, Cap said stubbornly. Anyway, women folks don't know about things like this. Sharon was angry, in spite of herself, and knowing her anger only made Cap more stubborn. She said, You didn't think there were any Indians either. You took Mort's words for that. If it hadn't been for Bannon, we'd all have been killed. She turned quickly and went out of the cabin. Swinging into the saddle, she started across toward her own cabin. It was dark, and she could see the light in the saloon and the lights in the Collins blacksmith shop, where his wife and little Davy would be waiting for him to return. Angry, she paid little attention where she was going until suddenly a horseman loomed in the dark near her. Howdy, he said, swinging alongside. From his voice and bulk, she knew him at once as Hi Miller, a big teamster who sometimes served as relief bartender. He had been drinking. She tried to push on, but he reached out and grabbed her wrist. Don't be in such a hurry, he said, leering at her in the dimness. I want to have a bit of palaver with you. Wants to talk. Well, I don't want to talk to you, she said angrily. She tried to jerk her wrist away, but he only tightened his grip. Then he pulled her to him and slid his other arm around her waist. She struggled, and her mare sidestepped, pulling her from the saddle. Miller dropped her, then slid from his own horse and grabbed her before she could escape. I'll learn you a thing or two, he said hoarsely. It's about time you settlers were learning who's running this shebang. What happened next, Sharon scarcely knew. She was suddenly wrenched from Miller's arms, and she heard a crack of a blow, and Miller went down into the grass. Guess who this is going to be? Run for the house, it was Bannon's voice. Quick! Miller came up with an oath, and she saw him charge. Bannon smashed his left into the big teamster's mouth and staggered him. But the man leaped in, swinging with both hands. There was no chance for science or skill. In the dimness, the two men fought like animals, tooth and nail, yet Bannon kept slamming his right to the bigger man's stomach. The teamster coughed and gasped, and then Rock swung a right to his chin that staggered him, and followed it up with a right and left. Miller went down, and Bannon stooped and grasped his shirt collar in his left hand. Holding the man at arm's length in a throttling grip, Bannon smashed him in the face again and again. Then he struck him in the body and hurled him to the ground. Sharon, wide-eyed and panting, still stood there. Get to your house, Bannon snapped. Tell your father to go armed. Always. This is only the beginning. As she fled, somebody behind her said, Hey, what's going on here? Behind her there was a pound of a horse's hoofs, and she knew Rock was gone. Swiftly, when she reached the house, she stripped the saddle from the mare and turned it into the corral. Then she went into the house and lighted the lamp. A few minutes later, her father came in. She told him all that had happened. He stood there, resting his fists on the table. Then he straightened. Honey, he said, I'm afraid I did wrong to stop here. I wish now I'd gone on with Bob Sprague and the others. They'd be most to California by now. I'm afraid. It's chapter 4. Love you. God bless.